The Panama Canal started as a dream to join two oceans, a dream to connect the world's greatest cities and the people who live there. Spanning 4 centuries, this dream was finally realized on August 15, 1914, when the ship SS Ancon passed through the Panama Canal. Like the 7 wonders of the ancient world, the Panama Canal is an engineering triumph of vast scale. It is said that the dirt dug from this narrow 45-mile strip of land would fill a hole more than 16 feet wide straight through the center of the earth. But like many of the great engineering feats that had come before, this shining modern marvel came at a high cost in both life and liberty to the workers who toiled to build it. In the days before the canal, ships traveled along the South American coast and around Chile's Cape Horn, a slow and dangerous passage. It took 67 days to get from New York to San Francisco using that route. The visionary French engineer Count Ferdinand de Lesseps wanted to be the hero who connected east with west. De Lesseps had already made a name for himself with the opening of the Suez Canal in 1869. Early concerns raised by Baron Gaudin de Lepine that the terrain and climate of Panama were different from the flat, dry conditions of the Suez were ignored. Funded with approximately 300 million francs from more than 100,000 predominantly small investors, the French started work January of 1881 with great enthusiasm. But hospitals soon filled with patients struck down primarily by malaria and yellow fever, also known as yellow jack. For every 100 people to come to Panama, approximately 20 died, and more of those who survived became very ill. People fell where they worked. Laborers dropped down into the mud. Engineers slumped over their equipment. Hospital workers died, having contracted diseases from the patients they tended. Company officials were struck down too. Harper's Weekly wondered if de Lesseps was a canal digger or a grave digger. By 1888, the company had excavated a mere 11 miles at the cost of more than 20,000 lives. Most of the canal workers are poor black laborers in the West Indies who could not afford the cost of a stay at the French hospitals, and many did not receive a proper burial. The French had no way forward. Ships idled in the harbor, crews dead of yellow fever, laborers fled, and the dirt wasn't moving fast enough. The company's misadventures made newspaper headlines worldwide, and the Panama affair ended the de Lesseps enterprise. Forever tied to the failure and ghastly death toll of Panama, de Lesseps was dubbed the Great Undertaker. Eager to expand American reach and influence, President Theodore Roosevelt saw opportunity in the French ruins and wanted to pick up where de Lesseps left off. But the Senate of Columbia would not ratify the Hay-Huron Treaty signed in January of 1903. Roosevelt supplied Panamanian rebels with troops and money so that they might gain independence from Colombia. His aggressive strategy, considered an act of war by some, worked, and the United States negotiated for the canal with newly independent Panama. The Hay-Brunovary Treaty was signed in November of the same year. By 1904, when the Americans took over the work, they had 3 advantages over their French predecessors. First, the theory that mosquitoes served as a vector for transmission of yellow fever and malaria had gained more widespread acceptance. Second, the Americans had overcome an outbreak of yellow fever in Havana, Cuba in 1901. That effort had been led by American Army Doctor Colonel William Gorgas. Third, the Americans would have control over sanitary conditions in Panama's 2 major cities, Colon and Panama City. The Americans were going to bring their can-do attitude, but what they had learned at Havana was more important. The biggest problem was that Panama was seriously afflicted by yellow fever and malaria. Both diseases could be fatal, but once you had yellow fever, you were immune for life. However, the population never becomes immune to malaria, and they keep transmitting it from infected person to mosquito to person, over and over again. Gorgas's effort to improve health in the canal zone was stymied from the start by the Isthmian Canal Commission appointed by President Roosevelt. Commission members were afraid of making the same mistakes the French had made, and did not want to be accused of financial mismanagement. With infected mosquitoes breeding in and around nearly every building on the isthmus, including the hospitals, people actually got sicker. Gorgas needed screens, chemicals for fumigation, and people to spray them, but neither General Davis, serving as governor of the Canal Zone, nor Chief Engineer John Wallace accepted that mosquitoes spread disease. In spring of 1905, the commission was reorganized, Wallace was replaced by John Stevens, and Gorgas had full control over available resources. But bureaucratic roadblocks had cost Gorgas an entire year. The Americans eventually eradicated yellow fever and substantially reduced death rates from malaria. Streets were paved, swamps were filled in, running water replaced the clay storage pots which had served as mosquito breeding grounds. Standing water was treated, buildings were fumigated, and screens were employed heavily. A new kind of architecture appeared on the island, a house completely enclosed in screens, with only one door to be as mosquito-proof as possible. People working on the island were dosed with quinine, a preparation made from the bark of the cinchona tree. Death rates from tropical disease began a steep decline. But while the health of white Americans on the Isthmus was greatly improved, the black foreign laborers continued to suffer from malaria. The workforce was divided into two categories of employee: gold workers, who were largely skilled white Americans paid in gold, and silver workers, who were mostly black laborers from the West Indies who were paid in silver. It was the gold workers who lived in the fully screened homes. Gold workers also had more nutritious food, cleaner water, and better working conditions. Restaurants were marked with either gold or silver signs, and silver workers could not enter certain clubs. Although the workers were classified as gold and silver, not black and white, the system in Panama was deeply segregated along color lines. The Americans hadn't just brought their can-do attitude to Panama. They had brought Jim Crow, too.
If you know the living condition of people that work on the plantation, it's the same thing when they was building the Panama Canal. The silver and gold wages came about because of the Jim Crow law. They didn't want to pay African people the same salary as white folks.
A silver worker who arrived in Colon, October of 1905, would later write that life was some sort of semi-slavery, and there was none to appeal to, for we were strangers, and actually compelled to accept what we got. We had to bathe, wash our clothes, in the same river, drink the same water, and cook. The horses and cattle, all of us together, use the same water.
There is this broad perception in the United States that what blacks are made for is to work. And even though they may be doing the majority of the work, there's very little gratitude, and there's a lot of stereotypes about blacks being shiftless. If you can say that they like leisure and alcohol and smoking and drinking more than they like work, then you can justify why it's all right to treat them as second-class citizens, not give them proper medical care, not pay them the same wage.
American newspapers celebrated white gold workers and disparaged black silver workers. On December 2, 1906, the Baltimore Sun described gold workers as bold, fearless, ready, and willing to do, but the foreign silver worker was lazy and worthless and does not perform one-third of the work that he should do. Underfed, overworked, and sickly, silver workers were struck down again and again by malaria. Laborers too sick to work did not get paid, so they could not eat, nor could their families. Rufus Edward Ford arrived on the Isthmus in 1910. Of his experiences, he wrote, "You turn to work in the morning with a gang about 125 men, and by 11 o'clock you will find about 40 men. All the others fall down with malaria." The truth is that the scientific method touted by Gorgas was not applied equally on the Isthmus.
Part of the reason these kinds of projects, whether it's the canal zone or later on it will be tobacco, part of the reason you use foreign nationals is because they're deportable and exploitable, and that's what makes them incredibly attractive.
Humanity dug a great canal, united two oceans, and in doing so remade the world. But this engineering triumph was built upon an American system of discrimination that contributed to the hardship and death of the workers who had made the dirt fly.